Well, welcome to Web3 and our talk tonight. So I'm Erica and I'm really interested in the potential for Web3, what it can offer us, what it offers us now and what it will offer us in the future, and how it differs to our experience of the internet and how we use it right now. So I'm coming from like a cultural, community, human aspect, but with me today is Charles.
Hi, yeah, so just like Erica, I'm extremely inquisitive about the space. I've been working with Web2 brands now for quite some time, and about a year, 2 years ago, started working exclusively with Web3 projects, consulting for them on how to connect with mainstream audiences, but as much as that, to kind of get under the hood myself and do, because there's a lot to learn. So that's the value exchange for me. It's not, I get paid, but I get paid more in education about how the space is evolving. So yeah, Erica and I hope to illuminate about the Web3 space, and we're going to take a kind of high-level approach today because it's such a broad space. But if anybody does have any questions and they've been digging into the space or a particular niche, we're happy to field those questions.
Yeah, and to add anything to the conversation as well, because I think there's one thing for certain: this is emerging, it's a frontier, and absolutely no one is an expert at the moment. And that's what's actually really exciting about it, because you can learn, you can meet people, you can chat to people really entrenched in the area, you can chat to people just becoming interested in it, and it's a really exciting space to be in at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. So this chat will be about what Web3 is, what it certainly isn't, and the largest of all, what it could be. And as Erica was saying, it's a conversational style because nobody's an expert. And just to say, is this one just big Ponzi scheme? If you know who this gentleman here is on the left, Sam Bankman-Fried, and the unfortunately FTX, you understand that yes, there really is no smart money in the space. And so, without further ado, let's tackle this question: is it just one big Ponzi scheme? I should just kick off with no. Essentially, what Web3 is the big fight in Web3 is, or the two different forks in Web3 are centralized and decentralized. If anybody's followed the FTX story, in case anybody hasn't followed the FTX story, I'll give you a quick overview of it. So FTX is a cryptocurrency exchange, or was a cryptocurrency exchange. It is a centralized cryptocurrency exchange. And what that essentially means is there is one central point of a failure. Sam Bankman-Fried, although he's been very, 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 very naughty boy, FTX was a fantastic product. It was actually a great product. It was used mainly by people that are using a lot of leverage in the space, which basically means that, let's say you are buying a cryptocurrency such as like Bitcoin or Ethereum, buying, say, £100 worth, you might use leverage like, say, 10x, which means that you now have exposure to, say, £1,000 worth of directional change. I think maybe I'm going too deep already. But essentially what I'm just trying to say here, FTX was actually a fantastic product, but it was a centralized product, one central point of failure. And Satoshi's white paper, which was the paper that kicked off cryptocurrency, say, 12 years ago, 13 years ago, that came out of the back of the financial crash of 2008. And the vision for that was a decentralized future, of which DeFi is one pillar. So yeah. I'm talking quite a lot here. Should I?
Yeah, and I think going back to, maybe we can talk to what happened over the last couple of weeks. And I know it's still emerging and not everybody not everybody knows what's happening at all, but this was like a bit, it's been on the front pages of every paper, it's been in the Twitter feeds, everything like that. Really what happened over the last couple of weeks, and what was, what did Sam do, and his family, in fact, that meant that, it was seen as a big shock to Web3, a big shock. It shocked a lot of people that were in it or out of it, and probably scared off quite a lot of people of wanting to get anywhere near Web3. And that's what we really want to talk to today, that yes, stuff like this happens, but there is reasons why it's happened, and that's emerging. And actually, it offers us more opportunities than it does failure So maybe talk a little bit to why he's been naughty, what else he was doing in the background, because actually one of the things he was doing in the background, which wasn't particularly good, it seems to be coming out, was lobbying behind the scenes for certain policies and regulations that would actually give him an advantage. So he was acting unethically, you could say, which isn't great. That probably seeds through the entirety of some of his business strategy, not the product, his business strategy. So maybe talk a little bit to the failure of that.
Yeah, I don't want Sam to overtake the great promise of Web3, but essentially the current sitting CEO of FTX now is the person that handled the bankruptcy of Enron, which speaks to the scale of disaster that he's overseen. And extremely talented guy, but I think he started this in his mid to late 20s and just kind of ran the company as his own personal piggy bank. I really don't want to go too much further into it because it will kind of derail what we're here to about, which is kind of avow the great possibilities of Web3. But he was essentially running it as his own piggy bank. It's come out that his parents were like buying up $172 million worth of the Bahamas, using people's personal cash. The guy that's CEO of it now, overseeing the bankruptcy, said this is the largest and grossest negligence he's ever seen in finance, which is the guy that took over the Enron bankruptcy. Gives you a bit of an insight to how huge that is. But the main takeaway from this is centralized finance versus decentralized finance. So centralized finance, centralized finance on the blockchain is essentially mirroring what we have in legacy finance and just put it on using blockchain to kind of, what's the main advantage of that really? Increase profits because you're cutting out so much of the middleman. The big difference between centralized anything and decentralized anything is rather than having one point of failure, you're spreading out everything, but in terms of failure, you're mitigating the chance of failure by spreading that out across an entire node of ledgers. And in cryptocurrency, the way that it works is, all that cryptocurrency is rather than having one ledger in a vault somewhere, you have ledgers which are spread out across any number of computers which are connected to the system. So if we move into this slide, it's get rid of Sam, and we can go into more about what is Web3 actually. So just to give the lineage of where we are, Web 1, which was read-only, essentially democratized information. So that was when we had TCP/IP. Essentially, you could go into, maybe not Google at the time, maybe like Mozilla. Yeah. Go into Mozilla and just search up some information, and it meant that somebody that was in Botswana, somebody that was in Azerbaijan, somebody that was in London had the same access to information on the internet. Fantastic. And then we moved into Web 2.
Probably most familiar, most people, because how many people do actually remember Web 1, but our current experience of Web 2. So social web, carry on from there.
Social web, and that democratized publishing. So a lot of people feel a bit jaded because of apps now, but it was fantastic, to allow people to be able to, anybody to be able to go and share their views and opinions, and maybe that's been abused recently. The poor thing about Web 2, that it was read and write, but not own. So essentially, all of the assets and control went to a small set of companies. And then we moved into Web 3.
Yes, so Web 3, read, write, own, almost a little bit more like Web 1, or the ethos of Web 1, really, what it really wanted to be before it merged into Web 2. Very much in its infancy, very much emerging. It is the frontier. It's not something that has a great user experience at the moment, but it democratizes ownership. It means rather than control with a small number of companies, there's far more democratization around ownership, identity, and to the users using it.
Yeah, absolutely. And to speak to the read, write, and own part, what that looks like is that essentially to take part in Web3, you need to get yourself either a currency or a token. And just to speak to the difference between those two things, so the difference between a cryptocurrency and a crypto token is that a currency use case is exactly the same as traditional currency, paper or digital. So whether it's a store of value, a form of exchange, And the same way that you would maybe go into a forex and approach currencies that way, that's cryptocurrency. And cryptocurrency has to be come from a native blockchain. So things like Bitcoin, things like Ethereum, those are cryptocurrencies, versus a token. And a token doesn't come from its own native blockchain. And so, for example, you have tokens which might go around some kind of shared value, like Friends with Benefits, if anybody's heard of Friends with Benefits, which is a DAO, which we'll speak about in a minute, around creatives. And you can join Friends with Benefits, and it's a token that is minted on the Ethereum network. But the reason that we've got Uniswap, that last logo underneath Facebook, is because, just to speak to, again, the ownership, people that were using Uniswap for previous 2 years before they launched their token were airdropped 15% of the total token supply of Uniswap. And then in the past 3 years, Uniswap's done around about $1 trillion of cumulative trading volume. So those early users of the Uniswap protocol are sitting quite pretty now on participating in the benefits of contributing to the Uniswap network.
Yeah, so really great example. Do we need to talk about any, so whilst one of the benefits of Web3 is the democratization, the fact that it is a much more equitable place, there's still quite a lot of slang and language around it that might feel inaccessible. It's easy enough to Google all of the slang and the language around it and demystify those words, but is there a few key ones that people have probably heard that we want to talk to in Web3 at the moment, maybe?
Yeah, sure. Let's pick out a few from here, perhaps. So, as we were just speaking about with FTX, that's a centralized exchange. So you'd be familiar perhaps with Coinbase, Binance, Kraken. These are all centralized exchanges. And what that is that they offer, their USP is that they would, against DEXs, which are decentralized exchanges, is they will offer to hold custody of your currency for you, which I'm a proponent of decentralized life. And the kind of slogan within crypto is not your keys, not your crypto. I actually do like Coinbase, but if you are holding your money in Coinbase, in Coinbase's own custodial wallet, they don't actually, on the back end, they don't actually separate that from anybody else's money. So again, there's one central point of failure on a centralized system like Coinbase. And if Coinbase has some kind of, if Coinbase goes down, for example, there's no way to recover your funds as opposed to somebody else's funds. It's just one giant pot.
But the benefit would, to ask a question, the benefit of Coinbase would be, first, it's publicly listed in the US, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So you could be seen as a benefit of it's under some of the legislation and etc. Of a publicly listed exchange. So that might offer you a bit of security, or it might mean that some of the work underneath it is far more regulated or looked into under the hatch and things like that. But then, as you said, the drawback of that is the centralised nature. It's acting a bit like the current financial system that we all engage with every single day, because everything we experience in with our standard banks that we have now, our standard saving and investments that we have now, our pensions if we have them, is all from a centralised system. And Coinbase, in my interpretation, because it's centralised, is acting a little bit like that, which does allow it to be easier to use by the user, because you recognise the way it works a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, like I say, whilst I'm all about decentralised life, like Coinbase are a fantastic platform. I think that their ideals are in the right place. And for the entire space to go past the tipping point, you need institutional finance to adopt it. To adopt it, and institutional finance has a hell of a lot of appetite to get into crypto, but they just they physically can't unless the regulation's there, and the regulation won't come unless you have these centralized actors.
Yeah.
And thanks to actually FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried, actually the regulation is going to come a bit harder and faster.
Yes, so that's one of the benefits. And I think it's also what I'm seeing and we're not going to be just talking about the finance and cryptocurrencies, but one of the things I'm also seeing is whilst maybe there's a fear around Coinbase adopting some of the centralised ways of operating, actually what I've seen over the course of the last 20 years, 10 years since the 2008 crash, is that as you saw fintechs emerge that operated in a different way to your institutional banks that we probably all use, that forced changes in policy that meant that our banking experience was much more for us as individuals, which is what's also favourable about decentralised finance. And by that I mean there was new rules about being able to swap your banks really easily. There was new protocols, there's new regulations. One was called open banking, and that will happen with this. They will change with the times and they recognise the benefits. And that what will happen, I think, with that kind of legacy centralised banking system and decentralised coming together is you'll get the user experience, which means it's easier to use, like when you have a banking app, with some of the benefits of Web3 in a decentralised nature.
I completely agree with you, Erica. I completely agree. So let me just quickly tick off some of these points here. So the reason I'm looking down is because we've got a monitor screen here, but for the viewers at home and in front. So currencies, I think we spoke about that earlier. Smart contracts. So a smart contract, the easiest way to think of it is it's an immutable contract on the blockchain. By immutable, it means it can't be changed, which can be programmed to do just about anything. So it could just be like, say, you use escrow to buy a house or buy something from eBay. It could be like, once this item's received and this money is received, send both out. So just imagine any if this, then that kind of protocol. That's essentially what a smart contract is. And whatever you can imagine, you can program a smart contract to do. But the thing that's fantastic about it on the blockchain as opposed to outside of the blockchain ecosystem is that it's immutable. So once it's been written, it cannot be changed. Stable coins. So just before FTX, the last kind of debacle in the scene was stable coins. And the stable coin is essentially a cryptocurrency which is pegged to a traditional currency. So the biggest stablecoin in the space at the moment is one called USDC, which is from a firm called Circle. And unlike algorithmic stablecoins, which we can't give, and I wouldn't want to give any financial advice, I would say completely stay away from algorithmically backed stablecoins. USDC is backed 1-for-1 with a dollar. So let's say that you're doing some freelance work for a crypto company. They'll probably want to pay you in USDC. And the reason that you can have more confidence in this, a fiat-backed stablecoin over an algorithmically backed stablecoin is that you can exchange that USDC for $1 at any point. DeFi, we've gone over, decentralized finance. But just for a quick point on that, because Web3 is read, write, and own, what DeFi does is give the average person an opportunity to interact with finance in high-fidelity ways which you just couldn't do in legacy finance. For example, I was a consultant recently for a firm called Volts, which is they're an incredible team, to be honest. We had someone join from CERN recently, which is like the Large Hadron Collider team. And Volts' raison d'etre is to bring something to the market called interest rate swaps. Show of hands, has anybody heard about interest rate swaps? Know what that is? Neither did I. I had no idea what interest rate swaps are. So interest rate swaps are the mechanism which allow for basically all credit and debt in the world. It's almost the biggest financial interest rate in the world. And to quantify that, it runs out of 3 places in the world, one in New York, one I can't remember, and one in the Square Mile in London. And between them, every year, year in, year out, that's $1 quadrillion of notional traded each year. And so that is 1 with 14 zeros after it, and no one in this room has ever heard about it. It's just done by 16 people in a room, very shady, making a whole lot of money on the back of our pensions, our credit cards, et cetera, et cetera. By bringing by introducing interest rate swaps into the DeFi ecosystem, it means that someone like you or I could use instruments like interest rate swaps, which I don't want to go deep into it because it's a bit boring, but essentially what it means is, let's say you're paying a mortgage at 2%, right? Fixed rate mortgage at 2%. So the bank knows, okay, every month I'm going to get 2% on £100 or 2% on £1,000, whatever. And then they say, but I think that the base rate is going to go up to about 5%. So they will then trade the notional. So they won't trade the actual. Rights to the mortgage. They'll make a synthetic product on top of the payments that they receive for the mortgage, and it's called a notional. And they'll trade that notional for the fixed sum for a variable sum. And the benefit for the person on the other side is they think, okay, there's 2% guaranteed every month, and I'm going to borrow some money at, say, 1.5%. And you're talking about, as I said, $1 quadrillion every year. So they might be borrowing something like $50-60 million at, say, 1.5%, and then lock in that 2% on the other side, knowing that the base rate might go up and they'll miss out on the opportunity cost of like 5, 6, 7%, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, we're probably not going to be doing that with like 50 million or 100 million at a time. However, just being able to access these kind of financial instruments it's fantastic for people being able to share in all types of economies. So
yeah.
I didn't want to. Did I go a bit deep there on like high finance?
It was quite high finance, but I think it's an area we've got to go in. And actually, the only way that's one of our tips around engaging with Web3 is do your research, and actually, because people are far more probably aware of the financial side of Web3. It is actually about financial literacy. We were talking about this yesterday. Yeah. Financial literacy is one of the first things, and not just financial literacy from like a crypto perspective in general, because overall, especially in the UK, every one of us actually has a relatively low level of financial literacy, lower than we generally think. And that's the first step of really engaging with this, up with financial literacy, and that will help you navigate some of the things that are emerging and happening in Web3, and be able to make decisions about how you want to engage with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, DeFi is just one pillar of Web3, and then you've got, say, kind of Web3 in which I think more of our interest is the cultural side. So you've got Nike have recently announced that they've just launched their .swoosh project, which, if anyone doesn't know, that is their play to basically tokenize everything they sell. So everything they sell, they're going to have like a metaverse version. And the story behind that one is there was a project called RTFKT, Artifact. And Artifact was founded by a bunch of kids that like love Supreme and love Louis and love like streetwear, basically. And their whole thing was, we're going to make this and we're going to be bought out by Nike. So they started making like kicks, like Dunks and Jordans, et cetera, et cetera. And then Nike came along and was like, well, we're going to sue you. And they're like, oh, don't sue us, buy us. And so they did buy them. And then essentially, I'm going into a rabbit hole, but essentially what happened there was it was a proof of concept for Nike. So Nike, I think, it was about a year and a half they bought them. They made about $138 million, which is obviously small fry for Nike, but what it was really important for them was like proof of concept that there's a whole growth space here. Yeah. And, you know, a market which generates $138 million in 1 year is okay, but that's the direction of travel. They believe that's the direction of travel, and that's why they've launched Nike.swoosh. And the VP of Nike.swoosh came out last week, I think, an article in Vogue saying, we are not focusing on the like crypto-initiated, what's called like degens. We are focusing on the crypto-curious and mainstream market, which I think is just a great sign that, you know, a Fortune 500 company, a cultural Fortune 500 company, thinks that this is the direction of travel.
And as you said, focusing on the curious, which cause they can then be, in my mind, like a bridge between the worlds, a safe bridge, a trusted bridge. So those curious can continue to be curious and enter that scene without having not taken the leap that, say, the more educated people or the people that are really deep in it, working in it every day, have done already.
Yes. And the last two there, so NFTs is one, non-fungible tokens. We'll speak about that in a moment.
Yeah.
And then DAOs, decentralised autonomous organisations, which is that's a rabbit hole as it is. I bet I'll go down there, I might not come out.
Yeah, we'll maybe chat about a little bit about that towards the end. So that was a quick tour of some of the language. There's loads more. What we're going to do actually after this talk is share a list of spaces and places and Twitter feeds, etc., that you can go to that either have jargon busters, are really great places to learn from. So, for example, I follow a platform called Surge. It's Surge Women, but it's not just for women. It's for women who are interested in Web3. It serves any audience. And that's written in quite an accessible way with the lack of jargon, or when it does use jargon, it has like a jargon buster. So we'll share a few of our favourite sites or the sites that helped us on our journey as well. And a few reads that we've picked around the current media perspective on Web3 and the stuff that's come out recently. So you can have a bit of an educated read about it, so both sides of the coin, for want of a better word. And we'll do that towards the end, because we do know we're kind of going on this journey of all the different aspects of this world, which it can feel overwhelming where you want to focus. So yeah, we'll probably go into the cultural side of it, which is a bit more exciting for both of us in a minute.
So tokens versus currencies. We've spoken a bit about this, but what might be cool is to talk about, this might be a good jump off for DAOs, in terms of like how people, like anybody in this room today could get involved with tokens. And the good thing about, I don't even want to show that slide actually, because it's talking a bit more about finance. But like, the good thing about tokenization is that you can use it to find like-minded people like across the globe. So let's say, what might you be into? What are you into? Do you know what I remember you're into is Marmite? Right?
Yeah.
That's okay. So let's say, just to run with me, bear with me for a minute. Let's say you wanted to have some kind of organization that really gave a damn about Marmite and all the possible use cases of Marmite and just was complete Marmite files. So you start Marmite DAO, token MAR. And what can happen in that is, so you might mint, let's say, 1 million Marmite tokens, right? They'll be worth nothing. But it's all about then what you do in that community. So where might you hold your community? You might start a community just with kind of FaceTime calls starting off, and then maybe go into something like Discord, and open it up. And then that Discord might be gated by your Marmite token, for example. And now, Marmite's a bit silly, but the point here is you're using it as a beacon to find like-minded people, and you can then attribute, you can give different attributes to that token, so it might have governance rights.
Yeah.
And with governance rights comes the right to decide what you as a group are doing, and if your token does accrue any value, because people think, actually, that's quite a cool crew, I like what they're doing interesting stuff, I want to buy into that, and so you've got 1 million tokens, more supply and demand comes into play, and it starts to go up in value. Now you've got your Marmite tokens worth something. If nobody owns those, 100% of it's in the treasury. And so as you start to give it out, it's not just about people being able to realize the value of it by selling it. They can hold on to that and then decide, actually, with that money in the treasury, we would like to do X, or we would like to do Y. There's some fantastic examples of this. Friends with Benefits, I've mentioned before, Pool Suite. In the financial space, they're probably the best because they're the most battle-tested. So Uniswap is absolutely fantastic, best in class. MakerDAO. Don't want to go too deep into DAOs just yet, but if you just remember these names and you've got any questions later, we can speak about how tokens are great for bringing communities together and allowing like-minded people to find each other and really push projects forward than I've ever seen in my life.
And again, following a different way of organising, the decentralised way of organising, and as you mentioned, the governance token, a way of being able to make decisions I suppose on like a very basic level, a current centralised world context would be a cooperative or something like that.
Yeah.
But that is just an example from the current centralised world that we live in. Obviously, also with any kind of cooperative and things like that, there is challenges because humans are involved, humans are making decisions, so it's never perfect. And I think we were talking about this earlier. The larger the group gets, as you can imagine, it's more and more humans, it's more and more organisation in a way that we're not used to organising ourselves. We're used to organising ourselves in a centralised, hierarchical fashion. But the opportunity here is to organise ourselves in a far more equitable, decentralised fashion, make decisions in new ways, make decisions in fair ways, have those decisions organised and shared in a completely transparent way. But that comes in its challenge. It's not a way that we think. It's not how we think currently. It's not how we were brought up, how we were educated, how we engage with our governments, how we vote on decision making and things like that. So it does come with this, which is what I'm really interested in, this mindset shift. And that's one thing that I think is going to be, it's emerging. And that's what we were talking about earlier. For me, Web3 represents a change, a real sea change. And I work in all sorts of industries and all sorts of, and part of what I do is community building. So I build communities and I develop movements. So I'm really interested in what happens when a movement begins. And that's what I'm seeing as Web3 it signifies a global level of like human change. It doesn't mean that anybody, not even for people who have never even heard of Web3, there is a sea change in the way we want to act, the way we want to interact with each other, the communities we want to be part of, and how decisions are made. Whether it's because we're in a climate emergency, whether it's because of the wars that are around us in Europe, for example, it's been happening a long time, but it's come into like a tipping point. And Web3 has been an indicator for that for me. And decentralized autonomous organizations, or as and other versions of that, decentralized autonomous communities, is the beginning of this, and is the beginning of the technology that will enable this change to happen, and signifies that humans want to be there, which is really interesting.
I completely agree. I actually don't think that DAOs should and are very good at scaling. So I think as soon as you get to like high numbers, it just doesn't work. There's way too much friction. But I think that the great thing about this space is that every time a problem comes up, and that's when naysayers will say, "Oh, is it a fad? Is it going to last?" It's like there's just giving you some insight as working with a lot of these projects. Is the brain drain here is insane. Yeah. So the moment one of the companies I'm working with is a streetwear fashion company, and there's people leaving Google to come and work with the team, which I'm like, why are you leaving Google to work with people that are interested in trainers? And it's like, because I like trainers myself, and I like the tech, and I like, and I think that how that can translate into DAOs, instead of going, oh, it's not going to work because as soon as it scales, it's going to fall over. Well, the thought then could be instead was, well, maybe we should be thinking smaller. Maybe we should be instead of like devolving all our power up to like an inverted triangle, so it goes through like a I've lost my train of thought. I haven't lost my train of thought. I've lost my words. But instead of like devolving all your power up, perhaps we work in smaller communities that are either like-minded or have some kind of share. Maybe it's a share of geographical share, sharing point, something like that. I have lost my train.
And that does come down to how many humans you can interact with. So it's like the human side of it again. The potential for those like micro communities that may be connected, a bit like a mycelium network.
Yes.
It's around micro communities and connections between those micro communities.
Yes. Okay, let's skip past these.
Yeah.
So we spoke about Web 1, Web 2, Web 3. So read and write, write and own. What is the significance of ownership? What is the significance of ownership?
We're experiencing an internet right now where really we have probably a complete lack of ownership. And this new experience will bring us back to, you could say that the only data that we truly own is our biometric data at the moment, really, if you think about it, our biometric data. And that probably is, that's still true in Web3, but this is an opportunity to make decisions around our data, our privacy, our identity, how we share our identity, and that obviously comes with its problems as well. And also elements of ownership. So for me, it's around equality and access. Where you were talked back to sort of high finance and things like that. This is probably some of the first, this enables, for example, the first time for people to have a seat at the table that might not have had a seat at the table before, to own a piece of something, own a piece of art, for example, whether that's digital or real. And that's what Web3 enables as well. So I've rambled a bit, so maybe you want to talk about
No,
that.
you didn't. I completely agree with you. So my thoughts on that, just to jump off from yours, because I do agree with you, is that the significance of ownership is that I think it will start to highlight different areas of capital. And so I'm like working class boy, like I grew up in the ends, and also so working class people and the intelligentsia are often like very anti like capital and anti money, which I just think is nonsense. I grew up poor. I'm like, I want to know. That I want to understand about money. And one of the things that frustrated me, so I worked in the music industry for many years, is I knew that there was value out there in the arts, and it just was being the only really way to make a buck, to start working with fairly prolific musicians, or the only really way to make like a big buck was to work with like big corporations and big brands who would pay you like, you know, a penny on the dollar for what they knew your real value was, and then basically extract it all into their kind of like at share level. So the significance of ownership is that it starts to, like cryptocurrency and tokenization will start to show up places which we're all aware that value exists. For example, like networks, the value of your network. For example, the value of your art and what that means to someone, how it speaks to their hereditary or their experience. And perhaps the natural reaction to that is like, oh, are we commodifying everything, that's cheapening everything? But actually what you're allowing everybody to do is the opportunity, and it might not work out like this, but there's the opportunity to own the contributions that you make to networks. So what that might look like, for example, let's say quite easy example is like, say, Uber. So Uber essentially, the people that are contributing to the network are the drivers and the riders, right? And same when you have Airbnb, the people that are contributing to the network are the people that are giving up their houses and the people that are staying in their houses. But all of that value which you're contributing to these companies is being extracted and given straight up to shareholders and no one else. So in a creator economy, or that's the phrase that's going around at the moment, but the phrase I actually prefer is in the participator economy, the people that are participating in that. So if you imagine like a Web3 Uber would have an Uber token, so every time you ride Uber, you would use your Uber token, the drivers would use that Uber token. Maybe there was a governance Uber token, which then people could say, do you know what, I don't think the drivers are being treated very well. And instead of like shareholders saying, well, I don't really care, like our pockets are lined, maybe the network say, we actually do care and we own 30% of the governance token, so we're going to vote that the way that the payment works for the drivers changes. I like that. I'm interested in that. Likewise, like there are a whole load, coming from the music industry, there's a whole load of artists that can't put an album out, but like in the club, they can get the reloads, like they can reloads, like just pulling the tune back, so that they can. So I know, as going to the rave, that there's a load of value that this person has. There's an artist called D Double. I was watching an interview with him recently, and he's vexed. He's like the MC's MC. So like Skepta will say, like obviously D Double's the best. Like obviously, it's not even a conversation. I think he said that on the Red Bull Music Academy interview, and it was saddened me to hear this Double interview, and he was like, yeah, man, I don't really care if I can get a reload because that's not feeding my kids. I need to put an album out. And Double, I love you, but like he's not going to put the album out that is going to connect en masse like that. But he has got value. He's got so much value. And say, for example, like case, what Web3 allows then is that perhaps you could do something where like, say that Double's got like a bar which sends the whole place crazy. he could immortalize that bar by tokenizing it and making, say, 100 of them, working with an artist who was maybe previously underpaid, who did his artwork, who maybe did it for free or £100. And both of them can get a come up where the people that are really enthusiastic about this, and you only need, say it's 100, so you only need 100 people to be really enthusiastic. That is not very hard for somebody who, you know, could build up like a cult following like that, but can't translate that into doing brand deals or selling an album. All of a sudden, it's shown up new ways to leverage the value that they have.
Yeah.
And that's the significance of ownership.
Leverage the value, and I really agree with that point and the example you've given. Leverage the value and look at new models. So we currently consider the only form of capital, financial capital, but cultural capital, et cetera, comes into it. But also we have a model in which we know isn't working in the world around consumption, which is not sustainable. That's all about scale. But this model is a different model. It's not about scaling. It's about reaching a few people that care, for example. It doesn't mean you have to go to the album, or the example where you're shipping millions of products, which is unsustainable, not good for the planet, et cetera, has supply chain issues, all of those things. You have much smaller forms of scaling that are sustainable, that meet the needs of the individuals and the groups there, that look at different forms of capital. And this already exists in communities where financial capital isn't the most important thing. It's a bit like, why are you saying this now? This has always been the better way, the more sustainable way, the happier way to live, where there's more levels of equality and diversity and inclusion. So it's not new. It's existed outside of this main system, but it's coming into this Web3 system in a way that is equitable, is sustainable, and has new forms of value and capital included.
Yes. So this book is, I don't know if anybody knows this book. Does anyone know this book? You know this book? No. Okay, cool. The Mystery of Capital, I think it was written about 20, 30 years ago. It's by Hernando de Soto. So the main takeaway from it was, from this book, or at least for me, was he asserts that the clear titles to land is what enables capitalism to flourish. I know capitalism is a dirty word, bear with me. And the reason that he says that is because once clear titles are established, there's a clear incentive to develop that land. So if you replace land with just anything that you have of value, and then he said, more important than the incentive to develop that land, so to put a hotel on it, or if it's like your own network, to develop your network because you can leverage that network in financial ways, perhaps, is that now you can leverage and borrow against your land or your asset, which is, like it or not, is the only way that there's a foundation of how companies and R&D was done. So, and that was since we turned from an agrarian to an industrial society. So it's not like that's one way of how industry could have been born. That was the only way industry was born. So when we moved from like fiefdoms and lords and serfs, etc., when the average man or woman could own land, they were then able to leverage that land to further their lives. And so I'm going back for an old book to talk about new technology, but hopefully you can join the dots on why we're doing that. This is just talking about something which Erica showed me last week, which I was like, oh my God, I've been trying to articulate this for so long. Do you want to talk about the Bacana 2 loops?
I'll try and say it really succinctly because I'm also aware of the time that we've got left. So this, again, I feel, and you can, I don't want to talk for you, Charles, that again, Web3 is a signifier of something much bigger happening at scale in the world. And there's something called, it's a paradigm shift. There's something that's called the Bacana 2 loops. And it's about when the dominant system is beginning to die and fade out, and a new system is emerging. And a lot of people, especially people in the ecology movement, for example, have believed this has been happening for a long time. And the more I've been reading about it, the more I'm finding evidence that it's been happening for a long time. And right now, Web3 is an enabling technology to help it continue to happen, to help the emerging system to become the new system that we all adopt. And our current dominant system that appears to be fading out is the one based on hierarchies, based on centralised systems like the finance system, systems that have over the centuries oppressed a large number of people and caused a lot of challenges throughout time, and that a few people benefit from. And a few people in a few territories benefit from. Now, it's not saying that everything's bad about this system, and what happens when this dominant system dies is that there's different things that happen. So, for example, part of the system dies, is hospice, they use this language for the thing, and it is used as fertilizer for the new system, and people act at different roles, and you can see that happening, even in the sectors that I work in and the roles that people like Charles play out. There's people that understand the system and have been part of it, we're all part of it, that help people move into the new system, that help people that are very dominant in the new system realise that that the old system realise that a new system is emerging, and then over on the left of this emerging system, there's loads of players that have been doing really innovative things in all different sectors, whether it's innovative things around equality and diversity, innovative things about businesses, innovative things about technology, innovative things in the climate emergency, or there'll be speakers and people that are famous that have been there all the time but not working together, and now they're beginning to work together and really work in a decentralised, smaller community, niche net community way with solutions that mean that not only can humans thrive, but all humans can thrive, but also, for example, the planet can thrive and nature can thrive and all things like that, which is one reason why I say people in environment and ecology really see this Bacana tulips as something that's emerging, and underneath it, maybe technologists see that Web3 is the enabling technology that represents the change that's happening, but also, as it matures, will be the way that we organise and operate in this new world. So we're in the gap. So do you want to talk to the gap?
Yeah, so the gap between the waning of legacy structures and the emergence of new structures exists because the new structures are not yet robust enough to sustain the entire market. So new systems are not built by burning the past, but by building frictionless pathways for resource to transfer from existing to emerging structures. So yeah, in the gap, the dotted white line behind us, and we really are, in terms of Web3, at the bottom of the, what is an exponential curve. Yeah. Does anybody know how many times you can fold a piece of paper before it goes to the moon? Do you know? You don't know. I think it's something like 45 times, and that surprises most people because humans are not wired to understand the rate of exponential growth, and so I have been rambling on this talk, and I don't want to subject you to too much of me talking, but there are many metrics which we can share after this talk, which basically display that we are in an exponential curve. And what happens at the bottom of that curve is this happened in Web 1 and Web 2. There's a guy called Mark Andreessen, who was the guy behind Napster, and he runs a super fund in crypto called A16Z. And he speaks about the same thing happening in Web 1, Web 2, and now again in Web 3. Is people poo-poo it. It's very early, so experiments fall over and go bad, and people are like, you see, it's not going to work. People lose money, like the dot-com boom, like, see, it's not going to work. Then the legacy structures see that, okay, this actually could be a threat for our entrenched power. We need to set everything against this, and that's the kind of stage that we are in now. So I don't believe this, but there's talk of the whole FTX thing of Sam Bankman-Fried being a plant because it's like perfect to get all the headlines. I don't believe that, but what I do think is, if I'm the head of Deutsche Bank or if I'm the head of any kind of legacy institution, this is great. I'm an opportunist. I'm going to use that story to say, don't get involved. This is wrong. This is wrong. But one thing I do love Coinbase for is they highlight all the people that are they've got like a page on their site which highlights all the people that are very vocal about how bad crypto is, and then shows you how much crypto they have at the same time. So there's a lot of hypocrisy in the marketplace at the moment where people say, no, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad, let us accumulate everything and then we'll say it's good. People are putting out things like, you've got companies saying blockchain bad, but they're putting out something called CBDCs, which is our central bank digital currencies. So again, they can't give financial advice, don't want to, but central bank digital currency is extremely bad because that essentially enables, what do they have in China? What's that called?
Authoritarian?
Oh, see, but it's a specific thing. Like I don't know if you know in China. So if you, it's not an honor system.
Oh, the social scoring.
Social scoring,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So if you have done something which is against their social scoring code, which could just be simple as littering, what they can do is because they have centralized financial system, like a real centralized financial system, and they have launched their own CBDC, they can just make everything at point of payment 10% more expensive for you.
Yeah, it's your punishment.
So central bank digital, you can't, it's for a state to say, do not trust Web3, do not trust crypto, but at the same time to be investing in CBDCs, which opens up the gate for, oh, I don't like what you've done, or I've noticed, have you seen the bills that are going through government at the moment, where if you've been around a protester or you've incited protesting, which written so broadly that that could just be a post that you've made on Twitter or a post you've made on Instagram, which could have incited some kind of protest, that could be this bad behavior, which could mean, yeah, you're not allowed to travel inside Zone 1. Yeah, everything's like 70% more expensive for you at point of entry. And I know that sounds dystopian and something very far away or in a sci-fi movie, but it's literally the technology that can be baked into central bank digital currencies. So, yeah, we're in the gap, and it's important to fight on, in short. So, why did NFTs blow up? So, this is a quote that Erica loves. The role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. And the reason I think NFTs blew up is because artists can connect to us on an emotional level and make for us in our minds narrative which we can resonate with us way more than just the kind of technical crap I'm going on about here up in front of you guys. So NFTs caught people's imaginations. And yeah, we've spoken about Nike, so we'll go past this. This is basically Nike essentially saying we don't see the purchase of a product being the end of the customer experience anymore. We actually see that being the beginning of the customer experience. And I'm working with a company, I won't mention their names, I'm not here to sell them, but I'm working with a company that are essentially doing a very similar offering to this Nike offering, but opening it out to everybody. And so, one of the things they're doing is, let's say Hypebeat, let's say StockX. If anybody's into trainers, I'm not into trainers. I've got size 15 feet. I get what I'm given. But StockX essentially, they own the secondary sales market. So if you want to get a pair of Jordans that don't exist anymore, you can go into StockX and find it. People like pay $250, $300 for a pair of Jordans, whatever. It's crazy. But just to quantify how big the secondary sale market is, I think StockX did 1.3 billion last year or year before. Anyway, so this is something that NFTs can solve. So StockX are in the midst of being sued by Nike because they're selling fake clothes. And all the authentication of whether it's real or not is done by humans who are like, yep, this is real. I actually don't think they're trying a trick. I think it's just very hard to verify. It's human error. Human error. So what one of the companies I'm consulting with are doing at the moment, they've created a cryptographic tab which you can sew into the back of your clothes. So let's say Off-White or Primark. Let's say Primark, right? Let's say Primark release a capsule collection with all of these tabs sewn into the back of the clothes. That item can tell you when it was made, where it was made. You can put any information into it that you like. How much it cost to make, what was the carbon footprint of it when it was made, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, when that goes into the secondary market, you pick that up, you can find out if it's real, you can authenticate it. So this is a use case for NFTs. People speak about NFTs as like the profile picture things, and NFT actually is just the contract, the immutable contract underneath that piece. So you can put anything on top of NFTs. That could be the deeds to your house. It could be a profile picture. I think that's stupid. It could be this is actually a real Nike shoe.
Yeah.
So here is a mainstream use case of these NFTs. So in 2022, Tyler, the creator, he collaborated with Louis Vuitton for Virgil Abloh, who is a designer and creative who's no longer with us. Great, you should know who Virgil is. Check him out if you don't. Tyler collaborated with Louis and Virgil posthumously for their 2022 collection this year, January. So you got 3 of the most in-demand creatives in the world, and the output of that was Tyler walked the runway, Tyler scored a soundtrack for the collection, and that score doesn't even exist on like any streaming platforms. And some random person, not even Louis Vuitton or Tyler, has managed to find that soundtrack and put it onto YouTube. So clearly, Louis are in the business of leveraging cultural capital. So let's talk about how Louis or any other business might have done that if they had leveraged NFT technology. Cool. So inclusion was major for Virgil, but experiencing the runway show was only available for the fashion elite. So one thing you could do is add some kind of like these tabs, for example, to the lowest ticket item in the collection. So whereas, you know, Louis products are going for God knows how much, you could just say, like, oh, there's like a £50 like T-shirt or a £20 T-shirt or a £10 T-shirt, and maybe they're limited, fine. But what you're doing then is allowing people to come in on the show, and if they've got that item of clothing which has a cryptographic wallet in the back of it, then you could airdrop them like behind-the-scenes footage, live stream of the show, like all number of things that you can do. You could gamify the collection, so you could like that music that was not exploited at all. You could randomly airdrop like 100 collectors with a token that receives 1% of the streamer royalties for that music in perpetuity, which is super cool. So now you've got an item of clothing that isn't just an item of clothing that you like, but it's actually accruing like royalties for life, which is, I think that's quite a nice idea. And then again, like, I don't know if there's any like marketeers in the rooms. I'm just trying to give you something to like vibe off of, like how this actually could have real use cases today. You could deepen the cultural ties. So Tyler, the creator, he's got his own line called Golf Le Fleur or something like that. And Virgil was the guy that helped him put it together. And Virgil was all about putting on up-and-coming creatives to like get into fashion and do their thing. So it's like, cool, pay the legacy forward and pay homage to Virgil. And what you could do in that case is you could have one item of Louis clothing and one item of Golf Le Fleur clothing, and if one person has in their wallet both those items, then you can identify them as superfans. And how that can work back to a brand is, because brands are always trying to figure out, was that the right move? Was that the right move? Was that the right move? It gives them new ways of getting insight back to, God, that was the right move. Look how many people actually have both items of clothing, which is just not an insight. There's no real first-hand way to get that insight back to companies. So, yeah, this is just like a kind of right now use case for NFTs beyond a bloody Bored Ape or some kind of profile picture. Sorry, I've rambled along. Do you want to?
Yeah, no, that was a great example, and I think for me, I really go into the inclusion aspect of it because there are so many examples of lack of inclusion in our current world that even from ownership, etc., this allows a different level of inclusion that's never existed before, whether it's a tiny little element of inclusion or it's access to things, and also. Again, valuing that cultural capital over financial capital. So if you do really love something, that can be identified, then you'll be rewarded for that love, for that attention, for that knowing that information around that. And this is a new way of doing that, which hasn't existed in the same way. It's been existed probably through networks that you know, who you know, nepotism, things like that, as opposed to true love and interest in something or knowledge about something. And that's been recognised in a new way through NFTs, through inclusion, through Web3.
How we do for time?
I think probably we need to wrap up quite soon.
We've got 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Should we move on?
Yeah.
Additional use cases, the unbanked. This is a great one.
Yeah. So we'll just wrap up on a few of these things. So, you put this stat in. 1 billion adults worldwide are unbanked at the moment. And I spent a bit of time in South America at the beginning of the year looking at technology and startups emerging there and user cases around banking in particular. And there was a user case, I might get this, oops, my speaker's just fallen out. I might get this incorrect, but I think in South America, in particular Colombia, they asked women in particular how they would like to be paid for the work they were doing. And I think it was around 89% of them said they wanted to be paid via a digital wallet with a cryptocurrency for several reasons. The currency in their country might be quite unstable, especially Venezuela, for example. They may not have been able to make the decisions they wanted to make with the earnings they were being made. So actually being able to access what they were earning and then use it to pay for things through their mobile phones was incredibly empowering for them. So there is a real user case amongst marginalised groups. It's reframing risk. The risk of not doing this right now is greater than the risk of remaining in the same situation. In fact, El Salvador adopted cryptocurrency as its national currency recently as well, not without its challenges, but because of the risk of not doing that. Play to earn.
Play to earn, super quick, because I know we've got 1 minute, you're going to cut me off. So play to earn, let's say I've got 2 kids, my kids love Roblox, my kids love Minecraft, and there's a lot of money being spent by parents on like skins, which you can never see that money again. And which is fine. We've grown up in that life or whatever. And let's say let's think of a more, maybe no one's got kids. Okay, Call of Duty. So let's say you got Call of Duty and you've leveled up your player to have this special weapon which you can only get if you're so good at the game. Well, if at the moment Activision are holding all that money, and when you get the new Activision game, you can't even access your old weapon, which is absolutely ridiculous. So in a play-to-earn game, everything's on chain and backed with like, blockchain underneath, and you can then start to create an economy on the game. So what can that look like? What's an example of that? So it might be that you're just really good at the game, and now you've got this weapon, and instead of you're going on holiday, so what you can actually do is put your weapon in a vault where people can like use it and borrow it and trade it or trade against it, and that can give you kind of like some kind of form of income. This is what I'm talking about as like owning, like broadening what it looks like to have an economy and broadening what it looks like to have capital. What was really good about this is during the during COVID in the Philippines, they didn't have a furlough program, and so there were a lot of people that were low income and their job just wasn't available for them to go and like earn and go and feed their family, and so a lot of them started to play a game called Axie Infinity, which I won't go into, but it's essentially a play to earn game, and this is how they were able to feed their families. So they were able to stay within their homes and feed their families. And I think maybe you were alluding to this. A lot of the innovation, as I see it, is not going to come from the West because everything's too cool. It's actually not cool, but we're too comfortable. Whereas countries that have the pain points, and this is where innovation comes from in life. If you've been broke, I've been broke. So if you like, that's when you start to get innovative. And so countries like certain places in Southeast Asia, certain parts of East Africa, certain parts of like South and Central America, absolutely, Venezuela, Brazil, where you can have money in your bank and all of a sudden the value of your money is 90% gone like tomorrow, or maybe the bank's going to seize. Like there are countries, I can't remember now, so I don't want to say a country that's wrong, but there's a country just in the last year that said, I'm really sorry, as a nation we've defaulted sorted. And so anybody that's got over 10 grand in their bank account, we're taking 50% wholesale like that overnight. These are the places where innovation is going to come from.
Yeah.
Have I done all right? You're going to cut me off?
Yeah.
Anything else?
I think that's it.
Cool.
So maybe our parting points are, we will share some websites, as I said. One of my favourite websites I mentioned earlier for learning about Web3 in quite an easy to access manner is surgewomen.io. We'll share that with you, not just for women. What's your favourite site? Or Twitter? We were talking about this yesterday.
Podcast, I like Sam, what's his name? Harris. I love his podcast, but it's not really relevant. Bankless,
Yeah, really
and
good.
A16Z, Web3 times A16Z. Search for those and it'll come up.
Yeah, and we'll share some other links that should be useful for anyone interested in this scene.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.